All right, former council member Maria Quinones-Sanchez, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for an opportunity. Hold on.
So we're going to start with just one question. In your administration, what are you going to do about poverty?
Well, first, we are going to start our budgeting process with zero-based budgeting. And zero-based budgeting requires that every single city department justify a mission and a vision. And the three pillars in which all of the departments have to design their budgets will be anti-poverty. What is the budget's reflection on anti-poverty? Public safety, and inclusion in an economic opportunity plan. Why are those things very important? Because many of the issues when we talk about poverty are infrastructure issues, are neighborhood-based issues, and the poverty conversation has to be about every single department in the city of Philadelphia. So that's the first thing, forcing streets department. What are you doing about poverty? Camera, lights, blight removal. L&I, what are you doing about poverty? Sealing properties, making sure properties are safe. Some of the challenges we have with substandard housing. The water department, what are you doing about poverty? The water department has to lead our tree canopy. What are the environmental issues that we got to address that lead to some of the health disparities and asthma? And then our health and welfare budget, which is, $3.6 billion. How are we supporting families? I would immediately stop this constant removal and separation of families that has disrupted families and based on poverty, right? We can't remove a child from a property or from a family because of a leaky roof or we have to take care of it. So everything will be focused around stabilization of families and investment in people, so that we can ensure they have a better quality of life. Doesn't matter what their fixed income is.
All right, Denise, do you want to get started?
Well, sure. I remember talking to you, former council member, because I get stuck on that. When you first announced that you were running for mayor, and I mean, let's be honest, you represented Kensington for a lot of years, and there's every one of the city's woes are concentrated in that area. Because I remember you saying that one of the reasons you were running is because you wanted to do more than you could as a council person. Can you talk a little bit about that? And also, can you talk a little bit about the fact that, you probably have the most experience with dealing with intractable poverty of anybody, but do you think that voters are going to not look at the fact that things haven't changed as much as they'd like and give you a chance to share your vision?
Yeah, thank you. That's a fair question. I think Councilmember Squilla and I, who represent Kensington, have both hit our ceiling about what we can do. What does Kensington have that is very unique? Resilient civic leadership. We have wonderful organizations doing great work that sometimes get overshadowed, right, by the crisis that's there. You have New Kensington CDC, you have Impact Services, you have Esperanza Health, you have some of the private work being done by Shift Capital. So Kensington has pillars, right? And what it lacks is a mayor that says, we're not going to concentrate a citywide problem on the backs of poor Black and brown people, which is essentially what we've done in Kensington, right? We've said, we're not going to allow this activity in the Northeast. We're not going to allow this activity in South Philly. And so what do? You concentrate and create this containment strategy. And so I lean in on that because it's not that Kensington doesn't have a plan. It's that it has a mayor that is not willing to stand up for residents and say, this is not allowable anywhere. And he's done it for every other part of the city because it's not allowable anywhere, right? And so that's one of the reasons why I'm running. No one, all the mayoral candidates are visiting Kensington, and I'm glad, and as my civic leaders call me about it, but no one understands the comprehensive nature of what we have to do around removal of encampment, affordable housing for, the folks that are unhoused and don't have access to housing. Cooperation with the counties about how do we help 80% of the people in Kensington who don't live in Kensington get back home. Access to treatment without barriers, no smoking ban, no wound ban. Right now, if you have an open wound and you want to go into a treatment center, that treatment center may not have the capacity to deal with your current physical situation, and therefore it lags. So all of the nuances about what needs to happen in Kensington, no one, you can't go visit it a couple times and understand it. And you can't go into Kensington and tell people what you're going to do for them because they know what needs to be done for them. That is the most disrespectful part of this election, when folks go in there and make a pronunciation about what they're going to do. For the folks that I worked with in Kensington, that's very disrespectful. They know what they need. They need a mayor who's going to support their work and have the political will to take the actions necessary.
So on day one for you, what does that look like? It's not just in terms of Kensington, but also in terms of the city as a whole, because while Kensington may have the most concentrated problem, Southwest Philly's got some issues too. So what does that look like on day one for you?
Yeah, that's so important. On Monday, we had a candidates forum in South Philly, and it was a 3-hour forum. And those residents stood there for 3 hours and asked very complex questions about their neighborhood, right? So you're right. And this is a problem that's scattered all over. And again, when you look at who's running and who has had to deal from the police perspective, from the blight removal, from all of those, no one has the kind of experience that I do. First 100 days, we know what strategic steps make neighborhoods feel safer and be safer. And what are they? Cameras, better lighting, blight removal, stabilization of vacant property. All of those 4 activities reduce violence by almost 30% immediately. So I would take the worst 100 intersections, right? And do it, right? If you follow the DA's 57 blocks, or or the 100 that I would target, but in the first 100 days, we would make people in those neighborhoods know that we see them and that we're not going to let the things we can control, right, continue to make them unsafe.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. Councilmember, you said something that I was really excited to hear, that when we ask you how you're going to attack poverty, you look at the budget. And the budget's kind of the biggest tool that we have in order to do this. So what I'd like to do before I ask you a little bit more about that, you were the principal council member on the Poverty Action Plan pre-pandemic. It was a while ago now, but a lot of interesting ideas came out of that. When we look at the budget and how we can use that as a tool to start to eliminate poverty, are there things from the Poverty Action Plan that you look at and say, yeah, I want to implement that?
Yeah, no, one of the best things we've done in council, COVID delayed the action steps related to the poverty plan, but, post-COVID, we, along with United Way and an incredible list of corporate partners, started the Promise, and United Way is managing that. And the first leg of the Promise engaged 60 organizations throughout the city to help us with benefit and housing stabilization for families. And it's gone really well. I believe the return on investment is something like $7 to $8 for every dollar we invested. More people got enrolled in LIHEAP, other housing assistance, as well as some of their, tax credit, child credit, was at the time when during COVID, we had 67,000 people who hadn't even applied for the first 1,000, let alone. So, it was delayed, but then it came online at the right time. The second leg of the promise that is very, very promising is this commitment to looking at the 400,000 people with a criminal record in the city of Philadelphia who've been sentenced to poverty, right? And doing an aggressive expungement process for them. And I'm happy to report preliminary numbers. 1,000 people have been processed, right? And eligible for some form of expungement. Now we're doing the assessment about how do we take them through that process. It's estimated it'll be about 15 months, partly because of state delays around the expungement, but we also have to pay for court fees and fines because that becomes one of the obstacles with people getting expungement. So happy to report 1,000 people in the pipeline. What we're struggling with now is how do we keep people engaged in those 15 months, right? Is it job training, paid job training? What is it that we do so that people know they're on a pathway to a different life? That is a real second chance, right? And so what I would do as mayor is really ramp up all of the things in those two legs that are working, right? Because I think they're hugely important. The piece that we have to work at next is really creating support for entrepreneurship and the creation of Black and brown businesses. And for me, it's more than just creating the business, is encouraging them to set up in our commercial corridors and all over the city, right? And so there are commercial corridors where there isn't a coffee shop. How do we engage someone to say, bring a coffee shop? There are commercial corridors, whatever the amenity is to create that walkability, giving businesses grants and helping them set themselves up. So that would be the next leg of what we would be doing as part of this public-private partnership. Look, government does some things well and some things we don't. And we have great stakeholders. We got to be a better partner to them. And so I'm very encouraged by the work that's been done over there. We have the William Penn funding at PICO, Comcast. We have a lot of people at the table that begins this conversation about public-private partnerships. So I would put it on steroids and again, look at what neighborhoods, what other pieces we can create to ramp up as part of that process.
So at the end of your first term, what would success look like in terms of bringing poverty down?
That's great. That's such a great question. Because success it means different things to different people. I know when we started the poverty conversation, it was like we identified there was 100,000 people that with a couple of things we could move them over the poverty line, right? And so that was like, you know, what Council President Clark called the moonshot moment. Once we started doing this work, for me, success now will be better defined by what systematic changes do we make to better serve folks. I think government is hostile to poor people, right? We make people line up, we make this, so to me, success is what systemic changes do we make where we're better serving people, and whether we move them across that line or not, I still think we can move a bunch of folks that we can create a way that we can take care of our most vulnerable regardless of their income and give them that stability that they need. Housing stability, predictability about their life, which really helps us with some of the mental health challenges that we've seen. I mean, if you don't have stable housing, you're losing your mind. If you don't have a stable job, all of those things create some of what we are living. So for me, is like success is how do we systematically break down the barriers of access for folks so that they can have a good quality of life, and that government reflects that, right? So in a zero-based budgeting, where the streets department has a poverty plan and a public safety plan and an economic inclusion plan, when the water department sees itself as the lead in our environmental justice issues, that to me will be success. When you bring this into all the departments and it becomes standard operating procedures, I know we're going to be well, because then it doesn't matter who the mayor is. Everybody, the system thinks that those things are the most important, and that's their mission and their value proposition.
Okay, former Councilmember Maria Quinones-Sanchez, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, folks. Have a good day. Have a good weekend.
You
You
too.
too.